The outback stretched for miles, bathed in the golden haze of the dying sun. It was a place of silence, of stillness, where the wind whispered through the dry brush and the distant calls of cockatoos echoed through the vast emptiness. But tonight, something was wrong. Evelyn Carter squinted through her binoculars, beads of sweat rolling down her temple despite the cooling evening air. The wildlife biologist had received an urgent call from a local photographer who had spotted something unusual. A pure white kangaroo, limping, covered in what looked like barnacles. She had seen sick animals before. Mange, infections, parasites, all common afflictions in the wild. But barnacles? That was unheard of. Barnacles didn't belong on land. They were creatures of the sea, clinging to whales, turtles, and boats. The mere thought of them latching onto a kangaroo's body made her skin crawl. Beside her, Jake, her second in command, adjusted the scope on his rifle. "This is messed up," he muttered. "We should have brought backup." Evelyn ignored him. Her pulse quickened as the distant figure of the kangaroo emerged from the brush, a ghostly silhouette against the crimson horizon. It was unnatural, the way it moved, slow, deliberate, as if dragging something unseen. Its powerful hind legs, built for speed and strength, trembled beneath its own weight. She lifted her binoculars again. Then she saw them. Hundreds of barnacles, swollen, pulsating, grotesque, latched onto the kangaroo's body like a living infestation. Some clustered around its shoulders and hind legs, others clung to its belly, burrowing deep into its flesh. Evelyn's breath hitched as she noticed movement beneath the skin. "Oh my God," she whispered. The barnacles weren't just stuck to the kangaroo. They were growing inside it. The animal paused at the edge of the dry riverbed, its head slowly turning, as if it sensed them watching. Jake gripped his rifle. "Eve, I don't like this." The kangaroo's eyes gleamed in the dimming light, dark, glassy, too human. Then, it did something that made Evelyn's stomach drop. It stood upright, not like a normal kangaroo balanced on its powerful tail. Number. This was different. It rose unnaturally still, its limbs stiff, its barnacle-covered chest rising and falling in a sickening rhythm. And then, it smiled. Not an expression an animal should be capable of. Something had taken hold of this creature. Something inside it. Jake swore under his breath, stepping back. "Tell me that didn't just happen." The kangaroo took a single slow step forward. Evelyn swallowed hard. Whatever this was, it wasn't just an infection. It was something else entirely. "Trank it," she ordered. Jake didn't hesitate. He raised the rifle and fired. The dart struck the kangaroo's side, and for a moment, it stood there, frozen. Then, its body convulsed violently, twisting and jerking in unnatural spasms. Black fluid oozed from its barnacle-infested wounds. The kangaroo let out a sound, a guttural, wet screech that echoed across the outback. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it collapsed. Silence. Evelyn's heart hammered in her chest. She forced herself to move, to breathe. Jake turned to her, his face pale. "Tell me again why we're taking this thing back to camp." Evelyn hesitated. Every part of her was screaming to leave it, burn it, forget she ever saw it, but she couldn't. They needed to know what this was, what had done this. Taking a deep breath, she signaled to the rest of the team. "Bag it," she said. "We're taking it in." And that was the first mistake. The Wildlife Rehabilitation Center was eerily quiet that night. The usual sounds, chirping insects, the distant howls of dingoes, were drowned out by the sterile hum of fluorescent lights. Evelyn stood at the observation window, arms crossed, watching the white kangaroo's chest rise and fall in slow, labored breaths. They had sedated it the moment they arrived, securing it in the medical bay, strapped down with reinforced restraints. They weren't taking chances, not after what they had seen. The barnacles had to be removed carefully. The team had spent hours shaving patches of fur, revealing the sickening, honeycomb-like wounds underneath. But every attempt at detaching the barnacles had been met with something grotesque. The barnacles twitched, writhing, pulsing, as if they knew. Jake sat slumped on a stool, wiping sweat from his brow. "This isn't right, Eve," he muttered. "I've seen parasites before, but these things, they're alive in a way they shouldn't be." She exhaled sharply. She knew. Every instinct told her they should have burned this thing in the outback, but science demanded answers. Taking a scalpel, she made an incision along the largest barnacle. As she sliced through the tissue, thick black liquid seeped from the wound, reeking of decay. Then, something moved. The barnacle twitched violently, its spiny edges retracting like a living organism. Evelyn barely had time to react before a long, eel-like parasite slithered out from beneath the kangaroo's skin. She stumbled back. "Jesus!" It twisted in the air, glistening under the surgical lights, its thin, translucent body filled with writhing tendrils. Then it turned toward her. She could feel it, watching, thinking. The parasite reared back, preparing to lunge. Jake grabbed the scalpel and slammed it down, impaling the creature midair. The thing let out a wet, high-pitched screech before shriveling up like a dying insect. The moment it died, the barnacles on the kangaroo's body convulsed in unison. Evelyn and Jake exchanged a horrified glance. They were all connected. Something was controlling them, something inside. Then, the machines monitoring the kangaroo began to beep erratically. They turned to the table. The kangaroo, previously limp, began to move, but not normally. Its limbs contorted, twisting, cracking. A violent spasm rocked its body as its eyes snapped open, and it smiled again. A guttural noise rattled in its throat. Not a growl, not an animal sound, but something deeper, something ancient. Then, before their eyes, the kangaroo snapped its own restraints. The lights flickered, and then the screaming started. The room erupted into chaos. Evelyn barely had time to stumble back before the white kangaroo lurched forward, its movements grotesque, unnatural. Its limbs bent at the wrong angles, joints popping as if something else was piloting it from the inside. The barnacles on its skin quivered, pulsating in sync, as if responding to some unheard command. Jake grabbed a tranquilizer gun from the counter, fumbling with the dart. "Jesus Christ, hold still!" he yelled, aiming. The kangaroo twitched, then snapped its head toward him with an eerie precision. Its pupils shrank to tiny black dots. And then it moved. Not hopped, not jumped, but lunged. One moment it was restrained. The next, it was inches from Jake's face. The gun went off, but too late. The kangaroo slammed into him, sending him crashing into the medical trays. Glass shattered, metal clanged. Jake barely managed to roll away before the thing's massive claws raked the floor where he had been. Evelyn grabbed a scalpel, heart hammering. The kangaroo didn't behave like an animal. It tilted its head, scanning them, its mouth twitching into that awful, knowing grin. And then, it spoke. Not a word, not a sound, but a wet, gurgling whisper. Dozens of whispers coming from inside its throat. Something else was inside that body. Evelyn's blood ran cold. "Jake," she whispered, "get the fire axe." Jake stumbled to his feet, face pale as he grabbed the rusted emergency axe from the wall. The kangaroo twitched again, its chest bulging outward unnaturally. The barnacles rippled, as if shifting. Something inside was moving, crawling, pushing. Then the first parasite burst from its mouth. Jake swung the axe, severing it midair. A second one emerged, then a third. Evelyn grabbed a glass beaker and shattered it against the creature's head. It didn't even react. It was shedding. The kangaroo convulsed violently, skin splitting in jagged tears. More parasites began pouring out of its mouth, its eyes, its wounds, screaming, writhing, searching. They weren't just feeding on it. They were using it. Like a cocoon. Jake didn't hesitate. He raised the axe and brought it down. Once, twice, 3 times. The kangaroo collapsed, twitching. The parasites writhed for a few moments more, then fell still. The room fell into suffocating silence. Evelyn stood there, chest heaving, hands shaking, covered in black, oily blood. Jake's grip on the axe was white-knuckled. "Tell me that thing's dead," he muttered. Evelyn swallowed, staring at the twitching remains. Then she saw it. One parasite, still moving, slithering toward the door, trying to get out. Her breath caught. This wasn't over. Evelyn didn't hesitate. She lunged forward and stomped down on the parasite. A sickening crunch filled the room as its writhing form collapsed beneath her boot, black fluid seeping onto the floor. For a moment, The room was still. Jake was panting, sweat dripping from his brow as he leaned on the fire axe, eyes locked onto the twisted remains of the white kangaroo. "Tell me that's all of them," he muttered. Evelyn wiped her trembling hands on her bloodied shirt. It had to be. And then the alarm went off, a deafening siren blaring through the facility. The motion sensors. Something was moving outside. Evelyn and Jake froze, exchanging a glance. And then the security lights flickered on. Through the glass window that overlooked the corridor, shadows stretched unnaturally against the walls. Something long slithered just out of sight. Jake tightened his grip on the axe. "Eve, tell me that's not—" A wet, dragging sound cut him off. Evelyn slowly turned to the observation monitor. Her stomach dropped. The entire wildlife facility was compromised. The camera feeds showed movement in multiple rooms, shadows shifting in the dark, long, thin tendrils slithering along the floors, curling around the metal tables. And then she saw it. The cages, the other injured animals, the parasites weren't done. They were spreading. Evelyn's breath hitched. She reached for the radio, her fingers shaking as she switched to the facility-wide channel. "All personnel, evacuate immediately," she ordered, her voice steadier than she felt. "Do not engage. Do not open any cages. This is a full containment breach." Jake swore under his breath. "We're not getting out of here, are we?" Evelyn didn't answer. She was already moving, grabbing a canister of industrial-grade disinfectant from the supply rack. If they couldn't save the facility, they had to burn it down. Jake caught on immediately. He grabbed another canister, dousing the floors, the walls, the equipment. The chemical stench burned Evelyn's nose, mixing with the rotting, putrid odor of the parasite's black blood. The lights flickered again, then cut out completely. Total darkness. The silence was suffocating. Then, a clicking noise, a chorus of whispers. They were in the room with them. Evelyn reached into her pocket, fingers fumbling for the lighter. Something slithered past her foot. Jake's breathing was ragged. "Do it, now!" Evelyn flicked the lighter. A spark. Then, fire. The flames erupted across the chemical-soaked floor, racing up the walls, consuming the lab in a blinding inferno. Screeching. The parasite screamed. Evelyn grabbed Jake's arm, dragging him toward the emergency exit. The fire spread rapidly, consuming everything in its path. Behind them, the glass shattered as something massive thrashed against the flames. They didn't stop running. They burst into the night air, stumbling into the dirt just as the first explosion ripped through the facility. The blast lit up the outback, a fiery bloom against the dark sky. They lay there, choking on smoke, staring at the inferno that had once been their workplace. Jake coughed, rolling onto his back. "Please tell me, that was all of them." Evelyn sat up, watching as the fire raged on. No more whispers, no more movement, just silence. For the first time in hours, she allowed herself to believe it was over, but deep down, she knew the truth. They had found one kangaroo, but parasites like this, they never came from just one.